Your fingers go numb first, then your face. Then a deep ache settles into your chest that no amount of moving seems to shake. The wind doesn't just blow, it cuts. For roughly 100,000 years, this wasn't a bad camping trip. This was simply what winter meant. You've probably imagined the Ice Age as an empty, frozen wasteland. Mammoths lumbering across endless white plains, the occasional human huddled in a cave, waiting for spring. That image isn't wrong. Exactly. It's just missing the most important part. Humans didn't just survive the Ice Age. They built an entire way of life around it, and some of the smartest engineering our species has ever produced came out of the coldest, harshest stretch of our history. Let's start with a basic problem. At the peak of the last Ice Age, roughly 20,000 years ago, huge parts of Europe and Asia were treeless. Wind-scoured plains called the Mammoth Steppe. Average temperatures sat far below anything most modern humans have ever experienced. There was little to no wood for fire. So what do you build shelter out of when the landscape gives you nothing but frozen grass and wind? The answer, discovered at archaeological sites across Ukraine and Russia, is bones. Archaeologist Olga Sofer spent decades studying sites like Mezhyrich, where researchers found the remains of dwellings built almost entirely from mammoth bones. Not one or two bones used as tent poles. Dozens of skulls, tusks, and leg bones, stacked and interlocked like a puzzle, forming a dome-shaped frame strong enough to support a covering of hide. Some of these structures held up multiple rooms, and were used, repaired, and reused for generations. This wasn't improvisation. It was architecture built from the only heavy load-bearing material available on a treeless plain. Now, picture actually building one. A group works together, dragging skulls the size of boulders into position. Someone stacks tusks in a curved, overlapping pattern along the base, distributing weight so the whole structure won't collapse under snow. Once the frame stands, hides are stretched over the top and weighted down with more bone at the base to seal out wind. Inside, a small hearth burns, using bone as fuel when wood runs out. Bone doesn't burn like wood. It smolders, dense and slow. But archaeologist John Hoffaker's research into Ice Age fire use suggests that with the right technique and mixed with fat, it could burn hot enough to keep a family alive through brutal winters. Fire wasn't just for warmth, though. It was for cooking food that would otherwise be unusable. Frozen meat is nearly impossible to chew and even harder to digest efficiently. Cooking broke down fibers and fat, delivering far more usable calories per meal, which mattered enormously in an environment where every calorie was hard-won. Here's the part that surprises people. Clothing, not shelter, may have been the single most important Ice Age technology. Researchers studying sites in Russia, particularly the Sungir burial site, found thousands of small ivory beads arranged in patterns that mirror where clothing seams would have been. The beads themselves survived. The animal hide and fur clothing they were sewn onto did not. But their placement told researchers almost everything. Tightly fitted trousers, layered tunics, fur-lined hoods. This wasn't loosely draped animal skin. It was tailored, multi-layer clothing, engineered for extreme cold. Roughly 30,000 years before anyone would call it technical outerwear. The evidence for this tailoring shows up in an unexpected place. Sewing needles, eyed bone needles, fine enough to work with sinew thread instead of thick cord, start appearing in the archaeological record right around the time humans were pushing into the coldest parts of Eurasia. A needle that small isn't for stitching together a rough animal hide cape. It's for creating snug, wind-resistant seams, the kind that actually trap body heat instead of letting it escape. So let's reconstruct a day inside this world. You wake in a bone and hide dwelling, the hearth reduced to embers. Frost has crept along the inside walls overnight. You pull on layered fur clothing, tied tightly at the wrists and ankles to seal out wind, before stepping outside into air that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. The group moves together, because alone, in this environment, you die. Hunters track herds of reindeer or horses across the frozen steppe, using the terrain itself, ravines, riverbanks, natural bottlenecks, to funnel animals toward waiting spears. Nothing from the kill goes to waste. Meat is eaten or dried. Fat is rendered for fuel and food. Bone becomes tools, needles, or building material. Hide becomes clothing and shelter, covering, an environment. This unforgiving waste wasn't wasteful. It was fatal. And here's the counterintuitive twist. The Ice Age didn't just threaten human survival. In some ways, it may have accelerated human innovation. Comparative research across Ice Age archaeological sites shows a dramatic increase in tool complexity, clothing technology, and long-distance trade networks precisely during the coldest, harshest millennia. When the margin for error shrinks that far, every wasted calorie, every gap in a seam, every collapsed shelter can be lethal. That pressure seems to have pushed early humans toward more sophisticated tools, tighter social cooperation, and technologies that, in a milder climate, they might never have needed to invent at all. There's also something easy to miss in all this. The Ice Age forced deep interdependence. No single person could build a mammoth bone dwelling alone, hunt large game alone, or keep a fire burning through a polar night alone. Survival meant trusting the people around you completely, sharing food even when supplies were thin, and passing down specific, hard-won knowledge: how to find water under ice, how to read weather before a storm, how to stitch a seam that wouldn't let in wind from one generation to the next. A single broken piece of that shared knowledge could be the difference between a group making it through winter or not. Now, think about your own version of extreme conditions. You probably haven't had to build your shelter out of animal bones or hunt to earn your next meal. But the underlying pattern, using every available resource efficiently, relying on the people around you, building tools and systems that outlast any one person's knowledge, that pattern didn't disappear. It's still how humans solve hard problems today. Your synthetic winter jacket, engineered with layered insulation and sealed seams, is a direct descendant of an idea, an Ice Age tailor worked out with a bone needle and sinew thread 30,000 years ago. Your instinct to lean on a community during a crisis rather than face it entirely alone is the same instinct that kept a hearth burning through a polar winter. The Ice Age ended roughly 11,700 years ago, and with it went the mammoth steppe, the great migrating herds, and the extreme engineering pressure that came with them. But the humans who walked out of that cold didn't leave empty-handed. They carried tailored clothing, complex tools, deep cooperative bonds, and a hard-earned understanding that resourcefulness and connection are what get a species through conditions that should have been unsurvivable. So the next time you zip up a winter coat against nothing worse than a cold commute, remember what that simple technology descends from. Your fingers aren't going numb first. Your face isn't aching from wind that cuts straight through. And that's not an accident. It's the inheritance of every seam an ancestor of yours ever sewed to survive a season that should have killed them.